So I often think about this as like building an arch, where when you build an arch, you go and you set up the scaffolding, and you put the stones there, and then you start taking the scaffolding away, and then finally there's like one last piece of scaffolding, and you're wondering, will this arch still stay up when I take out the last piece? You say, look, it seems like it's bearing almost no load as it is. Maybe I could pull it out and this thing will still stand. Once there's a story like, I think it was actually, when I was a kid, I was watching the show Ripley's Believe It or Not, and it was a story of the building where there's a very arrogant architect, and he had designed this original building in a certain way, and then the building inspector said, look, we're not convinced this building's going to stand. If you want to build this building, you have to put 4 more big supports in the front. And the guy said, this is terrible, I don't agree. He said, well, if you want permission to build a building, you got to do it. So here's what the guy did. He put the supports in and made them 3 inches too short, proving that his building could stand without those supports. Okay, so when you start considering how small the state could be, once you've got it down to this sub-minimal state, right, again, paradoxically, or the best way to describe it is a revised estimate of the minimum. When you get it down to a revised estimate of what the minimum is, when you adjust it down, far downwards from monopoly on those to something much smaller, then it is a serious question. Well, can we actually pull out the last piece? Can the supports that we think of as holding up the system be built 3 inches too short and be proven to be entirely unnecessary? Okay. So the last question I'll leave you with is, how plausible is it that the difference between the revised minimum, right, this revised estimate of minimum that you perhaps now hold, and 0, what is the probability that the difference between those two things is enough to be disastrous? And that is the question I will leave you with. Good. Let's see. Yeah. So how much time do we have for questions, Jeff? Or how much time do we have for questions?
20 minutes.
20 minutes. Okay, great. Okay, so now I will take any and all questions about either lecture or how we can go even further. Let's see. Yes, you? Mm-hmm.
And therefore they have a hard time in arbitration between the parties.
Right. Okay, so, I mean, basically what you're saying is that this industry is what economists call a network industry, where it's important for competitors to be offering compatible products with each other. For example, if you had the one bank that had an ATM card that was not a standard size, that would be a problem for you because there'd only be one kind of ATM machine that you could use, right? Or if you had a computer that was not able to interface with other computers, if you had an operating system that was just incompatible with other computers, that would be a problem. Now, what we generally see in industries like this is that firms get together in order to work out some common standards, right? So, for example, when you want to write high-definition DVDs, or in high-definition DVDs, you don't want to be to have 20 different standards because then no one's going to want to buy a player. So what actually happened in the high-definition DVD industry is firms that were planning on producing them got together and tried to work out a standard. Now, how many people here know the history of the high-definition DVD wars? Right, so for a while there was HD DVD and there was also Blu-ray. Okay, so even initially when people thought things weren't working, they were able to hammer it down to 2 standards. And actually what happened eventually is that the standard that was losing decided that they weren't going to, that it was hopeless, and they folded, so now we're down to 1 standard. So basically what happens in industries like this is that firms that are planning on having an interaction with each other get together and they agree to some common ground rules. This doesn't mean that they make their products exactly the same, but they make them similar enough that they are compatible or that they can interface, right? And this is, of course, what is done right now. For example, with auto insurance companies, you may say that if firms can come up with their own rules, that every firm will have its own rules. It doesn't actually work that way. Generally, precisely because auto insurance companies need to talk to other auto insurance companies, and so what they do is they work out in advance. They work out a common set of rules. Doesn't mean that everyone has exactly the same rules, but they are similar enough that they're able to get along, right? And again, precisely, this is of course one of the very first concerns that would occur to someone in this industry. What are we going to do if we have rules that are so different from everyone else's that we can't get along? And if you were working in this industry, you said, well, I guess that means that we don't want to do that. We need to go and get some common rules. Now, once I talk about firms in industry all getting together in a room to work out rules, people often start having the same worry that my colleague Tyler Cowan had, which is, well, while they're in that room working out their common rules, aren't they also going to then say, and by the way, let's also fix prices at 100% above cost, and let's also strike an agreement saying anyone who's not in this room, we will kill him if he tries to enter the industry, and on and on. So I have a paper with Ed Stringham on this very question. Here's the thing. There's actually, when you think about businesses getting together and working out of deals, there's actually two very different kinds of deals. So historically, when it was actually perfectly legal for firms to get together and agree to fix prices, they often did it. But what happens? So you have say 10 railroads, all in competition with each other, over some range. They all get together and say, let's all agree to raise rates by 50%. And everyone in the room says, great, that's a wonderful idea. We'll all do it. We'll all be better off. However, as soon as they leave the room, what were the executives for these railroads often doing? They would, first of all, call all their customers and say, well, you may have heard the rates are going up, and they are, but you're a preferred customer, so not for you. Second thing you do is you call up all of your competitors' customers and say, hey, I hear that your rates are going up by 50%. Why don't you consider switching over here? Okay, so agreements to fix prices are inherently unstable because it's the kind of agreement where you would like everyone else but you to keep it. And if it's an agreement where everyone wants everybody but them to keep it, what generally happens? Nobody keeps it. Okay, now that is one kind of business agreement that's not very stable. On the other hand, if a bunch of banks get together and say all of our ATM cards will be of these dimensions, everyone in the room agrees our ATM cards are going to be these dimensions. This way our consumers will have a convenient, comfortable life. When that happens, you don't immediately leave the room and say, suckers, now I'm going to make my card like this big. No. Once it is expected that a certain standard is going to prevail, you don't want to be the one firm that breaks it. When it is a matter of convenience and compatibility, it is actually foolish on the part of every individual to go and do something weird and different. On the other hand, it is the case of an agreement to screw your customers. That's actually a case where people generally want to break the agreement because if you're the one person who is treating customers well when everyone else is treating them badly, you can make an enormous amount of money. Okay, so that is probably an answer to a question that was more than you were thinking of. But let's see, other questions? Yes.
Wouldn't you agree that a lot of examples you gave for privatized versions of these functions are really private because in the end they're still enforced by the government and law security decisions enforced by the government, finding arbitration only useful is So is this more an example, or more analogous to monopoly contract type services counterexample?
No, I mean I say there's a difference. So I mean sometimes when pardon? Yes. So I mean basically when isn't most of what I call privatized actually only possible because it's enforced by the government. So for example, if you have mall police or mall security, ultimately the threat lying behind them is the government police, or an arbitration, ultimately the threat behind them is the court. Well, it depends. So first of all, I'd say that in a lot of cases, no. So in the case of arbitration, arbitration can exist just fine as long as government doesn't say it's illegal. Right? If arbitrators can say, look, if you don't go along with this, we are going to cancel your credit cards. You don't need to. That doesn't require government in order to make that threat. Or for example, if you posted a bond before you sign the contract, then you can actually pay you can just pay that out of the. You can pay any settlement out of the bond. Again, it's held in an escrow account and without any involvement from government. That's quite possible. Now, certainly it's true that in some of the cases I was talking about, government's required to enforce it. Precisely because I said, well, that is what government by definition is doing in the story, right? However, generally, again, it turns, what I would say is that, say, isn't government absolutely necessary to enforce this? Say no, government, government might stay around because people think that couldn't be done privately. That doesn't mean that it's not possible. And generally, what will happen if government doesn't do something is that then the private sector will try it. So right now, there are basically no private SWAT teams. Why are there no private SWAT teams? Because if you need a SWAT team, the government will give you one for free. Okay. However, if the government did not have SWAT teams for handling very dangerous situations, this would mean that private security would be happy to offer them. Of course, it would be more expensive, right? But in general, when you take a look and see that government is still doing something, doesn't mean that couldn't be done privately. It does mean that if government is offering for free and rarely comes up, then government may continue to do it. But I say actually in a lot of these cases, even right now, government is not necessary in order for the thing to exist. And the thing would actually be doing better and would at least be quite a bit bigger if government just said, look, we don't get involved in that. That's often all that it takes. Let's see, other questions? Let's see, yes, let's see, back there. Mm-hmm. 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 I don't think so. I mean, the thing about arbitration is that it's competitive. right? So you have different firms that are offering it. If there's one firm that makes it very complicated and the consumers aren't willing to pay for the extra complication, that firm is going to lose business. Right? I mean, in general, you can take a look at some very big firms in the United States, and in general, their motto is not complicate life unnecessarily. Right? So, for example, when you go and buy something, go and buy something at Best Buy. Best Buy is this enormous corporation. So, and yet, when you go to the checkout line, you don't have to fill out 20 forms. The goal of the checkout line is to get your money and get you out of the store as soon as possible. Why? Because if Best Buy has an inconvenient experience at point of sale, you're going to go someplace else. Right? So again, the idea that the complication is something that is necessary if you're bigger. I mean, again, of course, the firm itself is more complicated. The Best Buy Corporation is much more complicated than the kebab restaurant that I ate at yesterday. However, from the consumer's point of view, it's a very similar experience. When I want some kebab, I go to the guy at the cash register and say, I want some kebab. And when I go to Best Buy and I want a TV, I just go up with my shopping cart and I get a TV. From the point of view of the consumer, both are extremely simple. In fact, about equally simple. Although, yes, it's true. So when your bigger organization is more complicated, but not more complicated in a way that makes any difference for the lives of consumers.